Hello everybody and welcome to the Radiator Arms. For best sound quality, please listen on an ISDN connection. As ever, I am the James Martin of JayEmm on Cars, and I am joined by my two stalwart colleagues. To my left, Ant of SPORTZ N TOURING and JayEmm and Friends.
Hello.
And the man in the cans, it's the wonderful Will the Plank.
With emphasis on the plank.
Now, in our last episode, we discussed some of our automotive regrets. The cars we could have bought, the cars we should have bought, and the cars we maybe wish we probably never, ever came across. Today, though, we're going to go a little bit different because we're not going to really talk about cars in whole. Instead, we're going to talk about cars in part. Because I think every single car has at least one redeeming feature, be it a deployable dog guard or simply automatic up and down on all the windows. I think we've all found that one car that we wish really was, as a whole, a lot better than it was, but you still remember for that one thing. Before we get started, though, gentlemen, have either of you done anything interesting in your automotive lives this week?
Well, I can't say that I have, mainly because the weather's been absolutely awful and I have been trying to avoid driving any of my cars, and I had to drive one up today, and the only one that was working was the R8, and it started out as a white car. Now it's a kind of brown colour.
Yeah, it's not even Suzuka grey anymore, is it? It's just gone full, almost 1970s spec.
Yeah, although it was never Suzuka grey, it was Ibis white.
I know. Suzuka grey's darker than white.
Oh, this is true. This is true. No, it's
getting too subtle now.
Yeah, no, it's much more along the lines of cow dung brown, a two-tone with a sort of creamy colour on the top.
I think cow dung brown is actually an official BL colour.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me.
And you, sir?
Speaking of BL products, what I did this week in my automotive life was I managed to get an engine mount for my Maestro for the 5-speed gearbox conversion.
And this is not as simple a task as it might seem, is it?
No, it is not. Because I'm on my second Maestro now, and as I've said before, no, I did not intend to become the Maestro man, but I am. Here we are. It is what it is. When I stripped the first one for parts, because it was very rotten, I took everything for the 5-speed conversion, but left one body mount to mount the 5-speed gearbox. And it's taken me over a year to find it. And one came up on eBay, and I bought it, and it finally arrived. And thankfully, it's the right one. So I can have an extra speed soon, which will be nice when I pull the car out of storage.
I didn't know that this was your second Maestro. Does that make you the Maestro?
It does. I am the Maestro with a Maestro, as people like to call me. I'm the musical man with a musical car, maybe.
What is the collective noun for Maestros?
Maestries?
Is it a failure of Maestros?
It's probably just a social failure.
Yeah. Is it a strike of Maestros?
Exactly.
I don't. It's a bit unusual, isn't it?
Disappointment of Maestros.
See, I think it's maybe one of those cars that I actually have a bit of affection for, simply because I never had to suffer it when it was new. And now you can simply look back on it as this was interesting. I felt the same way about the Allegro. I drove the Allegro and I thought, I don't have anything against this.
I'd love an Allegro.
Yeah.
I want one in hearing aid beige.
Well, the one I drove, I think, was for sale at some point. I'm not sure whether it still is. But the funny thing is, do you know what the most valuable Allegros are now?
No idea.
The ones with the square wheel.
Yeah.
That they got mercilessly mocked for when they were new, and so they then discontinued them, and the Vanden Plas, I think possibly, BL nerds correct me, never actually had the famous quartic steering wheel, and today you'll pay Aston Martin about $2 or $3 grand to put a square steering wheel on the car.
Yep.
How times
And you can
change.
probably get one for less than that with the square steering wheel. So you get a whole car for that price.
Yeah. Now, I think we've actually, for once, gotten ourselves on topic out of the gate because, yeah, Allegro, square steering wheel. The rest of the car, I think, for a lot of people, a bit forgettable, but the square steering wheel has just endured in popular consciousness.
I don't think you get anything more niche than this. Starting a podcast to Maestros and Allegros.
And, of course, what is the one feature that your Maestro doesn't have?
Well, it doesn't have air conditioning. But hang on, what is it? Are you about to tell me what this one feature is?
Yeah. It doesn't talk to you, does it?
No, it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. And do you know what? I should have thought of that. It's the one question everybody asks me. Does it talk?
What?
No.
You don't know about this?
No.
Oh, yeah. So the Maestros, one of the early cars with digital dashboards, and it would talk. It would go on about low fuel warning, tyre pressure. Well, actually, I don't think it was tyre pressure. It was like engine temperature high. Call it like just like that. It was
Wow.
very posh synthesized voice. It probably sounded a bit like, Margaret Thatcher, to be honest. And to be honest,
This car is not for turning.
no, it doesn't have that. But they were all incredibly unreliable. So when you do see the modules and the equipment for it come up, it's like £500-600, and I'm like, I could almost buy a whole other car for that.
So did they add this in because they knew how unreliable it was, and they thought, well, if it's going to be that bad, we might as well make it entertaining?
Well, I just think it was just the best that British Leyland could do at the time, regardless of whether it was going to be unreliable or not. It was going to be what it was going to be.
I just find it fascinating because there was already a perfectly good system in place to alert you of anything wrong with the car. A light would illuminate. Or were they worried about the bulbs in the failure lights breaking or something like that, do you think?
I just think they wanted to be fancy, perhaps.
It didn't work, did it?
No, it didn't. The car was a commercial failure, I think, in the end, really, for British Leyland. And it probably almost cemented its death at one point. But, I have a soft spot for it. And I don't know. I like weird things. I'm a weird person. So there we go.
So I'll give you a little bit of weird.
Okay.
From just about the opposite end of the spectrum, the old Mercedes S-Class.
Oh.
The generation, I believe, my friend Darren will kill me if I get this wrong, W140.
Yes.
So the last of the old school S-Classes.
It was the W140.
When they changed, I think, which is actually the first car to be called the S-Class, because it was the SEL or whatever before, and then it became the 500, S600 or whatever. I drove one really gorgeous red example that I would have loved to have bought, but just didn't have the money at the time. Belonged to a friend of mine called Michael, who Ant has met before. You drove his McLaren 12C.
Yep.
And rather than parking sensors, which did come in later, it had parking sticks. So to try and help you work out where the back of the car was, imagine two really tiny aerials that just poke out of the rear corner of the car, in theory helping you see where it is in the rearview mirror, only completely useless, like totally and utterly just pointless, because I tried seeing them, I couldn't. They were awful.
Wow.
Can tell you a funny story though. My mother once reversed my dad's Jaguar into our house, and it was a then fairly new Jaguar XK, so the first shape XK from like late 90s or mid late 90s. He just got it, and he came home, and Mum said, "I'm really sorry, I've reversed the car into the house." The house was new, the car was new, Dad was not particularly happy. But he wasn't unhappy with Mum, not at all. He was unhappy with the Jaguar dealer. There were some unbroadcastable words spoken, which I shall interpret as darn gosh it and blooming hellfire. Those gentlemen at the dealership told me that it had parking sensors. To which my mother said, "Oh, do they go beep? Do they?" Now remember, this is 24 years ago. Parking sensors were fairly unusual, certainly for us. We'd never had a car with parking sensors. Mum had been reversing the car. Mum's a pretty good driver, actually. She'd been reversing the car, and all of a sudden it started beeping to warn her about something, distracted her, and then there was a crunch.
Oh. So instead of doing their job, They distracted her and had the opposite effect.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly that.
It's mad to think these days you don't get many cars without parking sensors. Even my mum's humdrum Dacia Sandero has parking sensors on it and a reversing camera. In fact, they mandated that in the US, didn't they? Reversing cameras.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the reason my Lotus Evora 400 had a reversing camera as standard when the 911 didn't was for exactly that, because Lotus realized it was cheaper for them to give all the cars a reversing camera rather than try and have them for specific regions. And so, yeah, it had a reversing camera because the Americans had it as a legal requirement, because a lot of their parking spaces you have to drive sort of forwards at an angle. So to reverse out without a reversing camera is actually pretty sketchy in some places.
I think it's quite famous that the Mitsubishi, should I say, Mirage has a reversing camera that literally looks like it's just been drilled on and tacked on from Halfords onto the back boot lid, and it's just this big eyesore kind of thing, which is just there because that was all to do with like the US regulations.
Wow.
One of the coolest reversing cameras, I think, is on my Gallardo on the rear spoiler. And it's got this little sort of like a fin that hangs down with a kind of pointed front.
Is it integrated into the wing?
So in the middle of the wing, you've got a panel, and if you had it without the camera, that had just a blanking plate. If you had it with the camera, thank you, Will. If you had it with the camera, then it had the camera plate. That was probably because I was turning and facing you and not adjusting my head position. And by the way, some of you complained about this being in the way of my face. Thank you very much for that. I would have expected the opposite. We mentioned in the previous episode that we are working on it, but in case you missed that one, we are working on it.
We are honestly trying our best here. I'm not saying that we succeed, but we are trying. You know, we're thinking very hard about a lot of the things you've said.
Yes.
Even one or two of them have actually been actioned. But yeah, no, the reversing camera on the Gallardo, it's certainly better than the reversing camera on a McLaren 600 LT, which is very, very neatly integrated into one of the diffusers on the back of the car. So as soon as you drive it in any form of adverse condition, you can't see anything out of it.
Yeah, but you made a good point about Lotus deciding that it was cheaper to actually just put the cameras on all cars. A lot of people don't realise that it is really expensive. Every variation on a car, when you have to actually manufacture them, makes it very expensive. The fewer variations and options you have, the cheaper it gets. And this is why, you know, obviously a high-end car in the sort of Lamborghini, Aston Martin, Ferrari kind of bracket, they can often have very specific options on them. But as soon as the car gets even vaguely higher volume than that, I think Lotus were looking at making several thousand Evoras, I think, if I'm not mistaken. As soon as you have to make variation, that means you can't just do a straight production run where everyone just does the same thing over and over and over again. You've got a much smaller production run, and then you have to change the tooling, change the process, and then do another. And every time you have to stop and change everything, that makes it expensive.
Yeah, it is for that same reason why I believe it has changed now, but historically, the BMW 1 and 2 series, no matter which one you had, here's your choice of 6 colours, that's it. You get to a 3 or a 4 series, any colour you want. And it's the same reason why, like you say, lower end vehicles, your Fords, Vauxhalls, Kias, that sort of thing, they'll do trim levels. Because then they know, okay, there's 3 different spec levels we have to build, and this is it. And then all of it is, you've got to choose this colour outside and sometimes in. Whereas for your Audis and the like of the world, you can get options and things, and Porsche now being probably some of the worst for that.
It's very interesting you talk about vehicles with options, because as somebody who does a lot of work on cars and likes to retrofit things when they can, for instance, I've retrofitted Bora Sport dials into my Golf, which didn't have that. So my instrument cluster now has a big full screen and all these fancy bits, and that's lovely. But for certain modules like heated seats in vehicles and stuff like that, other random little bits that weren't there, a lot of the time the wiring is actually there anyway. And all you have to do is just plug it in and code it. And that saves them having to make multiple wiring harnesses, because it's cheaper than making a wiring harness without the connectors for, say, the heated seat or that part which goes to the body for it.
Yeah, the cheekiest, I think, of all of these might actually have also been Lotus. who for the Lotus Evora and Evora S, so the precursor to the 400, what the Lotus guys now tend to call the Series 1 cars, you could option electrically folding side mirrors. And it was, I think, a few £100 option that not everybody went for. However, the wiring was all there for it. And more than that, the motors were all there for it too. What you actually got for your extra few £100 was, instead of the Ford-derived switch, in fact, I think potentially is Ford or Jaguar, but of course it was, part of the era where Jaguar and Ford were one and the same. So we're talking the indicator stalks on my Evora, I think, were Mark 1 or Mark 2 Focus. And they would just by default fit you the switch for the wing mirrors that didn't have the folding function. And if you spent the extra money, they just fit the switch that did have the setting for folding.
So there was no software change.
No software change at
all.
all.
It was literally just a switch. So people could go out and buy the switch, put it in, and have folding mirrors.
Correct.
Yeah.
For 20 quid, you've got folding mirrors.
That's not right. It's almost like BMW with their heated seat subscriptions.
Oh, that PR disasters don't come better than that.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating, especially because you're like, look, it's a BMW, it's a premium vehicle. Like, come on, guys. I tell you something though. It's a mutual friend of ours called Chris. He was on the hunt for a Boxster. And in the first generation of Boxster, the 986, heated seats are actually a relative rarity, which is kind of surprising given that it's a convertible. I would figure people would want heated seats. Not everybody does. But he actually found, he was looking at second generation 987 Boxsters. He found one and he said it's got cooled seats as well. And I said, no, I don't believe it. I checked. He was right. It had heated and cooled seats. And I've never, ever seen that. I haven't seen it on 911 of that era. And I've never seen it on a Boxster. Somebody went to town. And it definitely wasn't the person who specified my Maserati Quattroporte, which I worked out when new would have been about just shy £100,000 car. They didn't tick the 450 quid box to have heated seats in it.
It's like buying a Volvo. If it doesn't have heated seats, what is the point?
Are they optional in a Volvo?
They are optional. I have seen some S40s and stuff that don't have them. I could not believe it.
Because I've driven Volvos from the 80s that had heated seats. That's just an essential.
I love quirks in some cars for like options on cars you didn't expect to have them. Right, my dad had a 2007 BMW 523i SE, so it was pretty basic. It had the 2.5 litre detuned one, and that had soft closed doors.
That's pretty good.
You mentioned a Volvo. I was doing a little bit of research over lunch, and apparently there was an S80 with a heartbeat sensor.
What?
Yeah.
Is that
S80 with a heartbeat sensor?
Is that because most people that drive S80s are so old they might die behind the wheel?
Apparently it was a security feature, so that if you were returning to your car you thought it was locked, there would be an indicator on your key, apparently. So you'd know if someone had somehow broken into your car and was waiting to ambush you. Allegedly.
What year was it? Did it say if it was a first gen, later gen? Because I love the S80 as well. Actually, I've got quite a soft spot for Volvos. There's just something about those Swedish bricks that I really love. In fact, my dad, he bought in 2004 a Y-Reg S80 2.4 petrol automatic in kind of a maroony brown. It was, and had the cream interior. I tell you, that was one of my favourite cars he's ever owned. Not because it was fast, flash, or anything like that, but it had one of the best factory sound systems that isn't optioned I've ever heard. It had their radio was CD and tape. I just remember thinking, I've never heard so much bass come out of just standard door cards before.
Oh, don't get me started. The cars I've been in now. You and I recently both experienced the Cupra-born VZ,
Oh my
which
Lord.
I think has the worst stereo I've ever experienced in a car. It was tragically bad.
James, that was one of the worst stereos I've ever experienced in my life.
Yeah.
Was it really that bad?
It was awful.
Was it like, if anyone buys this car, they clearly have absolutely no interest in anything good, so we'll just slap in a really cheap
No.
stereo?
No. It's
Because I thought the Cooper Born was cool.
It's so much worse. So much worse. Okay, because you see, now, there are lots of companies out there who, for whatever reason, think they can get away with just putting in an absolute dog's egg of a stereo. Case in point, my Ferrari F12. That cost somebody, when it was new 12 years ago, £250,000. And I think the stereo is not quite as good as the base one in my Peugeot 407 that's 20 years old, right? It's shockingly bad. It's embarrassing. I can almost forgive it because, look, it's Ferrari. Like, a lot of the customers probably really don't care about the quality of the stereo. I just think that if you're charging that amount of money for a car, you really ought to put some effort in.
Yeah, they're probably thinking the V12 gives you the soundtrack.
Yeah, and I get so wound up when you get people to say, oh, you've already got the best, stereo in the entire world, in front of you. And you're like, well, yeah, great. But after, the 7th hour on the motorway, you do want to be able to listen to something. And you'll know, of course, as an audiophile will, one of the good things about decent quality hi-fi is that you don't have to listen at high volume.
Absolutely.
If you have a crap stereo, you have to turn it up to be able to hear things clearly, which then, of course, is very stressful and on a long journey can lead to driver fatigue, which is dangerous. So I'm going to stick with that. Bad stereos cost lives,
Yeah,
I will stick to that.
It's not just bad stereos, it is bad sound isolation in cars as well. They cost life.
Oh, for sure. But this Cupra, I could have, I think, lived with it if it were just bad. But for two things. First off, they had Sennheiser branding all over the thing.
No.
Now, Sennheiser is a great company that knows what they're doing. I'm sure we both use Sennheiser kit frequently. It's very good quality stuff, and in many parts of many industries, it is the standard for a very good reason. If you have watched or listened to any film anytime, there's a very good chance a Sennheiser product was in there. The MK416 was for a long time the shotgun mic for film recording, right? They know what they're doing. Their audio stuff, their headphones are fantastic. I've had loads of them. They're great. So it's a company that knows what to do, okay? And when you put a brand name on a speaker, I think you're trying to make a statement that this is good. You put whatever the name is, whether it's Harman Kardon, Sennheiser, Bang & Olufsen, Dave, like it doesn't matter. If you've put a label on it, you're trying to make a point that you think this is a selling feature of this vehicle. Okay. But it wasn't just bad. What it was like there was a small child constantly fiddling with the DSP settings. So as a song progressed, depending on whether it was instrumentation and vocals, just vocals, the whole profile of it changed. And because of where they put the speakers in the car, and because of the fact that they've then mucked around with everything, the voices moved from the front to the back to the front again within the same word sometimes.
Wow.
And it would go from being like, it's like somebody had their hand on the treble and the bass and was just basically mucking around with them the entire time with no real respect or thought about what was happening. And the problem with something like that, I did spend a long time looking through the menu. You can't turn it off.
No.
I thought I'd find a setting which was like dynamic auto optimization of sound or something. No, nothing like that. It was atrocious. Somebody at Sennheiser should hang their heads in shame for allowing their name to be stuck to the side of that abomination. I'm sorry, I feel very passionately about this topic.
You see, this is something that can be fixed with a software update easily, because a lot of the things with the DSPs, I remember in the early days in cars, they'd give you like a whole reverb effect, or they'd give you some stereo spreads, something like that, and you'd be like, yeah, okay, whatever, that's kind of fine. Yes, you can turn it off, but none of them have ever been that wild with the way they change the sound. That is the thing that got me, is, as you said, the sound was going all over the car, but not in a pleasant way, not in like a, oh, we're looking at Dolby Atmos, DTS, everything, oh, this is great. No, it was just...
It was horrendous.
It was. And as I said, if you'd had the option just to turn it all off and the speakers were bad and the amplifier wasn't great, you could live with that, because at least it would be consistently bad. This was inconsistently bad.
Yep. Do you know the most disappointing stereo I ever had in a car, though?
What was that?
This is a source of great personal shame. My Aston Martin DBS. Now, I had my V8 Vantage, which had what they call the Aston Martin Premium sound system, which is made by Alpine. I think most people will be familiar with the Alpine brand, particularly those who lived through the 1990s. And actually, Alpine also makes some really darn good stuff, and I think often don't get the credit they deserve, because they've done some really cracking stuff. That stereo in that Vantage wasn't the best in the world, but I tell you what, it was one of the most listenable and enjoyable systems, bearing in mind it was a convertible. So I drove it a lot of the time with the roof down, which makes life a lot more difficult for any stereo, because you've got effectively an infinite baffle now to deal with, or open port, whatever it is. But it was cracking. Now, the early Astons had a Lin system, which apparently is notorious for just breaking. Lin is a very well-regarded hi-fi brand in Britain, although I don't know why, because I'm really not that fond of their products. I say the same for name. But that's because I'm a hi-fi weirdo. Anyway, and I have ears that work, which is why I don't like name stuff. That's me off their Christmas card list. Anyway, any decent audiophile will know what I'm talking about. Regardless, the B&O system, which is the very distinctive one with the pop-up tweeters that I think you can still get in some cars now, that was a £4,000 upgrade.
Wow.
So the premium system in the Vantage was already kind of an upgrade, stage one, as it were. And then the B&O system is another £4,000. And more than that, it was developed explicitly for Aston by B&O. And I've heard some of the B&O systems in other cars, and some of them are actually pretty good. Some of them are nowhere near as good as they should be, but some of them are really decent. The stereo in the DBS was tragic. It had no real bass, because somebody decided that the Alpine put the subwoofer behind your head between the seats. Mm. In the DBS, they put it between the driver and passenger's feet, where it just gets trapped. There's not much sound comes from around. Like in a car, I want the sound to surround you, to envelop you. It all seemed to come from the center, which is very, very odd. The treble wasn't great. The bass wasn't great. The mids were cloudy. It was actually like, when some stereos are just not nice to listen to? Mm-hmm. It was that. And I was like, this is a £4,000. Okay, in the DBS it was standard, but on every other model it's £4,000. Shameful.
It would have been better with just a standard set of speakers with just a bass, kind of like multi-driver, and some tweeters up front, just giving you the stereo image. Would have probably sounded 10 times better, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. And, there are cars out there, like I know VW have experimented with the Dyne Audio systems. I think did Volvo as well for a bit. But those are really good. There are cars out there. Bear in mind, by the way, that when it was new, that DBS in 2008 was £180,000.
Wow.
They were a huge sum of money. And a stereo is just pants. But it looks fancy.
Do you know what that reminds me of? I think the stereo was better than that, but expectations were way higher. And that was the Rolls-Royce Wraith Music Edition that Richard from Challenge the Road lent you, that we took out.
Yeah, that was pants.
Was it bad?
So actually...
Or was it just expectations were high?
No, all right, I'll be perfectly honest about that, as we now seem to be in this avenue of car hi-fi, which is I'm perfectly happy to stay in, and I could do multiple podcasts on the whole topic.
Let's get out of it soon, because I'm actually running out of... I'm starting to fall asleep.
Don't worry. So for those who don't know, Rolls-Royce had the Wraith, so the basic coupe version of the Ghost, which is a very cool car, and I really like it. And they did an inspired by music edition. I think there were maybe about a dozen of these in all, and some of them they collaborated with artists to do. So I think they did one from like the Kinks or something like that. I forget which artist exactly. I think one was Ronnie Wood of the Rolling Stones, and So one of them has like lyrics stitched into the seats, like stuff like that. They call the tweeters and the speakers have got this covering on them that they call, it's like, I think the paintwork of the car is lyrical copper, and the tweeter covers are like a really nice bronzy kind of color. Like it's a beautiful car, like really gorgeous specifications. Richard's one is one of the plain ones, but they also have as standard this like top of the line Rolls-Royce sound system, which they all developed. You know what? It's got tweeters and things in the roof of the car and everything. And they tell you it's basically the best stereo in a car you'll ever hear. And if all you like listening to is wistful indie singer-songwriter, acoustic guitar, and speaking, and one singer type stuff, it's pretty blooming good. I gotta say, it's up there. No bass, like none. And what got me as well is that actually some cars you're never ever going to be able to put a good stereo in.
No,
because it's a car is already deeply compromised to put a stereo in. But if you were ever going to have a chance, it's a Rolls-Royce, because if you add another 100 kilos to it, who cares, right? And also, they're rock solid, really well insulated. So they are the perfect thing to put a decent stereo in. And yet this, it was like the subwoofer was disconnected. And I did have a play around with the settings and things. But as you well know, if you've got a really good stereo, you shouldn't need to touch any of the settings. If you're having to turn bass and treble up or down or that, it's gone wrong from the off. It's just not right. And yeah, this one was it's just underwhelming. The rest of the car I blooming loved. It was so cool. You got to drive it.
I did.
And there is something amazing about a dirty, great big suicide door, which is another cool feature.
There we go.
Oh yeah, back
There
on
we go.
track, very seamlessly done. I don't think they noticed.
Yeah.
Right. Because you can't reach it. So you're trying to close the door and it's too far away. So you've got buttons to close the door. And I think there's not much more luxurious than a button that closes the door for you.
You know what? I think you're right there. And that makes me think of, I was just thinking of what other cars have that. And the only one I can think of off the top of my head is the Koenigsegg. Not the first one, not the CCX.
Was it the Regera had
Regera,
stuff like that?
that's it, yeah.
Didn't the Regera have basically on a button you could open all of the compartments? It was a robotized body, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
That's really cool, the
It
Regera.
does. When you see it opening and closing, it's very cool.
it was quite interesting, Anthony. Just this morning, you bought the R8 down, didn't you?
I did.
And I was parked next to my Golf because I picked you guys up and I took you here. And Anthony opened the front boot compartment area on the car, and I was like, "That sounds really familiar." And I said, "Anthony, open your boot area again." And I was like, "Yeah, I hear the noise." And I opened the boot of my Golf, and I said, "It's got the same mechanism on the boot of that. It sounds like
It does sound the same, yeah.
I got flashbacks to having my Evora when I had my dirt cheap Jag XJ, because they have the same mirror folding mechanism. So when you lock the car, you go to fold the mirrors. It's the exact same sound. I also get used to stuff. I'm sure people do when you have a car, like on Porsches of a certain era. They don't have a lock and an unlock button. They've just got one button that will either lock or unlock. And it's up to you to work out which it's just done. Because I can never remember, is it one flash for lock, two flashes for locked? I can't recall. But eventually you realise there is a slightly different sound between the car locking and the car unlocking. And after I've driven it around for about a week, you just know whether it locked or unlocked because you can hear it. Please tell me I'm not the only one that does that, gentlemen.
No, I get it. I've got a great quirk for you guys.
Oh, let's
Now-
have it.
Is it about cars still?
It is about cars
Just
still.
checking.
Yes, no, I do have many a quirk, but on this occasion, we are talking about cars. Recently, I had to bring my mother's Dacia Sandero in for a service.
Good
Was
news.
that good news?
It was good news, apart from the fact for some reason they only change the oil every other year, unless it goes to 18,000 miles. So,
Sorry, hang on a minute. I'm going to stop you right there.
yeah.
You have to bring it in for service annually.
Yes, to keep the warranty.
But they might not change the oil.
No, they just do other things like look at the fluids and filters and stuff. I don't know. It has a service plan. We don't worry about it.
Do they just put it on a ramp and just poke it with a stick and go, seems all right? Like,
They'll top up fluids and things like that.
Pretty much all the stuff that I do for her. Anyway,
all right, as you were.
But
apologies.
as I was. And I had a courtesy car for the day because I needed to get back to work. I had things to do. And they said, okay, we'll give you this MG3. And as I was driving it, I went to back in somewhere and I was like, these parking sensors sound really familiar. And then it made a bong when I opened the door and I was like, this has got Volkswagen warning chimes. This literally, it has got Volkswagen parking sensor noises and the dashboard makes Volkswagen noises from like the Mark 5, Mark 6 era. And it turns out as well, how I found this out was, is it SAIC or is it the Chinese brand?
SIAC, yeah.
Yeah, SIAC.
SIAC, yeah.
They have an involvement with Volkswagen, so the MG3 actually has some Volkswagen components in it. I'm pretty sure it had Volkswagen mirror switches as well, and some other odds and ends on it. So that was my MG3 quirk, other than it being awful, car-wise, because this is a 2024 model, and it still had the exact same powertrain and all the same pretty much gubbins, apart from a minor facelift from when it came out in the early 2009, 2010, whenever it came out.
Really?
Something like that. So it's the same 1.5 litre naturally aspirated engine. It was gutless. There was nothing to about 4,000 RPM. The suspension, I know you like stiff suspension, Ant, but even you would get out of that car going, what? And it was just so unsettled. It was just, I don't know how they sold so many, to be honest, because there's a lot of them about.
They're cheap. I think that's it.
I don't think they're cheap. They were cheap enough for that, especially now. Maybe when they first came out, but in 2024, before they refreshed it, to not even have a reach and rake steering wheel. No, it was only just up and down. No bring towards you.
Because that's the sort of stuff that, like, now we're living in 2025, right? Which, as far as I'm concerned, is the future, and I will hear no one say anything different, right? It's one of my great frustrations when I go onto Auto Trader looking at something. Unless I'm looking at like a 50-year-old bit of British Leyland old tat, right? Yes, I know the car has airbags and power steering and, a 3x3 safety harness or whatever. Like, half of the solid paragraph of text is stuff that you're like, I know it's got these things. It's 2025. It doesn't have a choice. Of course, it's got seatbelts in it. Come on.
Yeah, like tires. It's got tires on the rims,
All right. Hey, have either of you ever gotten in a car? And it's a very, very narrow window, I think maybe of only about a year or two, from the American market where it has the seatbelt that goes towards you, like comes around the door frame.
I haven't, but I've seen
where with the thing like...
It runs, it's like got a track that runs alongside like the outside frame of the door.
Oh no, I haven't used and then it slides back.
Yeah. So because you put your lap belt on, and then the sort of top section of the seat belt it puts on for you.
I'm sure they didn't just have
experienced that directly
in American cars. I'm pretty sure the American market, Nissan 240, the 180, the 240s had it as well.
No. It was any car that was sold there.
Oh, just any car had to have it.
Yeah. So Ferrari had to do it. Everyone had to do it. So I only experienced it because I drove I think it was an RX-7. Like it's not the N, is it? What do they call the generations? It's F, isn't it? The FC generation. So RX-7.
Yeah. So not the last one, the one before that.
Yeah. The one before the curve, the one that looks a lot like a Porsche 944.
Yes.
Right. And again, I think it was really short-lived because even the Americans realised it was a stupid idea. It was just needlessly complicated, and you could see the million ways in which it could go wrong or do something horrendously bad. It was madness.
Every time I looked at cars, that I just think that surely doesn't seem as safe. It's got a track it could potentially rip out of and go into in a crash. I don't know how they fixed it down. I'm sure there was some very safe system for it, but the amount of research and development and cost it must have been for cars only in North America. Bear in mind, we never saw them in Europe, as far as I'm aware, to have those modifications made. Like that was probably unfathomable to think about. as you go going back earlier to talking about how a lot of cars, even in their different trim levels, still have the same, perhaps bumper or same kind of thing with just slightly different fixing, same wiring harness, things like that, to then go and have to completely re-engineer the way the seatbelt work for one region.
Yep.
Insane.
Big region, though.
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
I mean,
yes. Admittedly, North America is a very big region.
So I don't know if it's still true now, but it was at one point. Subaru in Britain, I might be a little bit mistaken here, but not by much. Subaru in Britain, I think last year or the year before, sold something like 3,500 cars. Right. In recent memory, Subaru in the USA sold more cars than Mercedes and VW combined. Wow. It's incredible, isn't it?
Who did?
Subaru.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think it's one of these things that I find very interesting, now, working in this sphere of automotive journalism, is that there are often cars that you look at and you think maybe they were an utter and total failure. But actually, no, they were an utter and total failure here, but elsewhere they flew off the shelves. They loved them. I mean, the Toyota GT86 didn't ever do particularly brilliantly here, but in other markets it really did. And I got to say, this does lead me on to another thing I wanted to mention. I don't really see it anywhere else. I love when the Japanese will do a version of their cars specifically for the people that know they're going to mod them. So you get the unpainted, plain front bumper, steel wheels, like basic seats, because they know you're going to chuck them in the bin anyway. And there's a guy who was a little while back doing bits before AI took over everything on Instagram, I think, and he was doing pictures of like an artist's illustration of like a 911 in the same spec with like black unpainted bumper, steel wheels.
They did a Veyron or something like that as well.
I love that sort of stuff. And I think that's, where a lot of Japanese cars in recent years have failed here, because, of course, the modification scene is not what it was, and it was never as big as it was in Japan, and certainly not in the States. That there are cars like the GT86. I think it failed because Toyota just expected everyone to mod it. But here we went, well, hang on a minute, it's on finance. We can't touch it. Like, we can't do anything. And I mean, the Americans are so good for this. Again, whether it's still this way or not, I don't know. Did you know, by the way, lads, we have a lot more people reading my newsletter in America than we do here.
Really?
Yep.
Fascinating.
60% of the people reading my newsletter are from the USA.
How many of them do you think I'm going to fly down for the curry meat that you've got going on?
Probably a couple.
Probably a couple, yeah.
You can't get a good curry in America, exactly. So it's fine. You got to travel for these things.
But it's interesting. Before you go away from the topic of like Toyota and stuff like that, it's interesting that the GT86 was also basically a very badge engineered car, wasn't it? Because it was the Subaru BRZ, and I think in America was it the Scion TC or
TRS, I think,
TRS
or FRS.
Yeah, Scion FRS. That was it.
So I think this is actually a case where I think maybe the term badge engineering feels a little bit disingenuous, because what it was a collaboration between Subaru and Toyota. Effectively, Toyota wanted a sports car, and because let's face it, if you were to look at the BRZ GT86, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't look to me like a Subaru. Like, it's not the sort of car that Subaru would make or have made. It does to me feel more like a kind of second coming of the sort of sports cars that Toyota used to make.
Yep.
Even going back far as like the 2000 GT and stuff like that, which is an incredibly cool car I'll almost certainly never drive. But Toyota actually did also tell me that they had heavy involvement in the engineering things. Like, yes, it's got a boxer engine in it because that's Subaru's expertise, but it was a requirement of Toyota that they fit their D4S, I think they call it, direct injection system. And Subaru, apparently, whether this is apocryphal or not, I don't know, but this is what Toyota told me. Subaru said it couldn't be done. They said, no, it's not going to work. It can't happen. It's not compatible with how the engine is put together. And Toyota basically said, right, hand me that. And they made it work. And handed it back. And I always liked the Subaru version. I think it's a very, very cool car. But unfortunately, the GT86 has got to go very high on my list of great automotive disappointments, because I think, like everybody, I really, really wanted to like it, but ultimately I just couldn't. And I think the reason for it is because it's trying to be a modern version of the cars of like the 80s and 90s that were just hilarious fun. And the problem is, it's like when someone tries to make something look like an old photo. What they did was they were trying to emulate these old cars, but the cars in the 80s and 90s were doing the best they could at the time with the limitations imposed on them. Whereas what Toyota did was they took a car that really should have been a lot better than it was and deliberately made it bad in certain areas, most famously with the Michelin Primacy tyres that they fitted to it. So what you had in
the Prius.
Yeah, as were the magnesium wheels that it had, which actually are really cool wheels. And the problem is, what it then happened is, it wasn't, oh, great, it will slide about everywhere, it's lots of fun. It was just snappy. It was just unpleasant. The engine's the worst bit about it, because, you know, everyone got annoyed with people like myself because we drove it and went, ugh, this engine's not nice. And yeah, but you journalists have been saying for ages, what you want is a nice, not overly powerful, high-revving, naturally aspirated engine, which on paper is exactly what it is. It's just, there is no joy whatsoever in revving out a GT86. It feels like a chore. Like, whereas you get in something like an old Civic Type R or something like that, and that engine is begging to be thrashed at all points in time, and it's a delight to do it. You revel in it. You know, like S2000, stuff like that. It's born to rev. GT86 wasn't. The GR86, meanwhile, completely different car. Vast improvement. Oh, the GT86 also has an enormous torque, like black hole at about 3,000 RPM, which makes it feel even slower than it is.
I can't wait till your S2000 comes back.
It's soon. Very, very soon. In fact, possibly even by the time this podcast comes out.
Oh.
It's not far away.
When the weather's good, you've got to take me out on it. I need to hear that engine.
The weather is what we're waiting for.
Yeah.
Basically. So I like the fact that, you know, certainly if you used to buy like a Mustang or something in the States, you'd get a big performance catalogue. Like, I mean, someone told me at one point, again, I think it probably has changed, but you used to get like almost an Argos catalogue of stuff. I went to Shelby in Vegas at Christmas time or just before. And it's great because what they do is you buy your car from your local Ford dealer and you say, right, I want a Shelby. And effectively, they'll then, you know, Ford will build your car, send it to Shelby, and they'll then take a hacksaw to the side of the thing if you're getting a wide body and basically just strip the car back and rebuild it and do effectively whatever the customer wants.
You used to be able to get some pretty good upgrades even on things like the Ford Focus in the UK, the Ford Performance Catalogue, and then they did a lot of stuff with Mountune as well. And you could keep your warranty. So you could have the Mountune upgrade. I can't remember what it was, what the horsepower jump was, but it was a reasonable amount, and you get to keep your warranty.
Yes, well, as our friend with the forklift is making some noise outside, I tell you what, I think it's just about time for an Archer's moment. Could you top me up, please, darling?
Yes, with some Schlur.
Yes, the good people at Schlur were kind enough to send us 4 bottles of their fantastic non-alcoholic fizz, which is it's grape juice, is what it is. And this one is their limited edition Schlur Summer Punch, which I'm looking out the window here, and it doesn't feel particularly summery, but let's see if this improves it. They haven't given us any money or anything like that. I thought I was just being exceedingly cheeky by saying, can you just send us some free stuff? And you know what? Sorry, I'm doing this all wrong. Sorry. Allow me to...
Lovely.
Go. You weren't coming here expecting to have ASMR drink pouring, were you?
Oh, that's actually got a bit of like herbal or botanicals or something in it. Actually, you know what? There's some strawberry going on in there as well, I think. No, that's quite. Have a bit of that. You think? For those who do drink, it'd probably be quite nice. You know, they may be pepped up with something, although that would rather defeat the point.
Let's try that.
In my head, this is probably what Pimm's is like, but I wouldn't know.
Let me give it a taste test.
That's nice.
Oh, I do say that's quite lovely.
Well, it's lovely, isn't it? If only it wasn't 5 degrees and soaking wet out there, it'd be the perfect beverage.
That has got a Pimm's-esque taste.
Okay, I'm not wrong. Yeah,
no,
okay.
you're not wrong. That has got a Pimm's-esque taste. We've got an aftertaste of of that.
Yeah, there's some nice tasty notes. It's got a good nose to it. You know,
Exactly.
it's lovely.
Well, as someone who also doesn't drink and enjoys a little bit of Pimm's, or used to, that is quite a nice little refreshing throwback.
All right. Well, thank you to the nice people at Schlur. And if you happen to have a business and you'd like to throw lots of money at our new venture, we'd be very, very happy to hear from you. Although I'm not going to be doing any sort of intimate grooming products anytime soon. I'm sorry, gentlemen. All right, there is a line I've drawn, and I will not cross it, at least not for anything less than about 50 grand.
So no masculine landscaping stuff then?
No masculine landscaping, thank you very much. Now,
How about gaming?
yeah,
If NVIDIA want to send us some graphics cards through,
that would be nice.
that would be good.
Yeah, that would be lovely. The 5090, Ti maybe. I've got standards.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, we've talked a little bit about some features that we love in cars. What about some features that we hate? And I'm going to give you one that is a feature. I'm not sure you even call it a feature, but I think it's going to count, right? That I guarantee is going to give me a groan in stereo. The Volkswagen Beetle, the new Beetles, fake flower pot.
Yep. I knew you. As soon as you said that, I knew straight away. As soon as you said Volkswagen, I was like, "Yep, it's going to be the flower thing."
It was so awful, wasn't it?
I think it's kind of cute. But it is, don't get me wrong, it is ridiculous. I think the reason I find it kind of cute and funny now is because it is so stupid.
Yeah, no, it's awful. But do you know something? Did you ever even notice the fact they did a third generation Beetle?
No.
I've seen only a few handfuls of them.
See, in Britain, obviously, we've got shed loads of the original Beetle because I think there's not a corner of the world. You know, there are tribes hitherto untouched by Western society driving Beetles around, right? You then had the new Beetle, right, which, okay, did basically take away all of the fun and pizzazz of the old one, but look a bit like it if you kind of had, you know, pretty bad cataracts.
It was like a crap TT.
Yeah, it was. It really, it was, wasn't it? It was like somebody...
Golf, wasn't it? Based on the Golf?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's a TT though.
Yeah,
True.
It's my platform.
Yeah, it's basically like a TT that's been overinflated, isn't it, really, at that point? Are you all right? That's the Muttley. That's the Muttley impression.
So it's just funny because it's so true.
So, but then, undeterred by the disaster that was the new Beetle, they did a third generation Beetle. And I see quite a few of them in the States. But here, I think I've seen one.
Yeah.
They were so successful.
I think a friend of mine's got one of those.
It's actually a much nicer looking thing, but it's also got to the point where there's not really much Beetle-y left about it. And also the thing with the Beetle is like its styling is almost the result of its packaging and thing, whereas with the new cars, they're trying to really sort of ham-fistedly make the car a shape it doesn't want to be.
Do you mean like all the new Minis?
The new Mini, I think, did a much better job because it was basically the same proportions as the old one, just plus 25% on the photocopier.
Right. So the new Mini, the ones which came out in like the early 2000s, I think are brilliant. You know, they're great. I'm on about like the late one, the F56 variant.
Okay, yeah, no, you're correct, because what they did there was they basically lengthened it, I think, by about half a foot. And the moment they did that, the shape is wrong.
Yeah.
You know, so you look at it from the front, looks fine. Look at it from the back, looks fine. All right, okay. We have to talk about the lights, don't we? The Union Jack lights on the
Oh,
Mini.
yeah.
My wife, she had a 3-door Mini one, and she had a 2016 model because she refused to buy the one with the Union Jack lights.
Yep.
She absolutely refused to buy it.
Good lady. Yeah.
Yeah, and this was pre, like, obviously, I don't want to get too political for too long. This was pre-Brexit and Farage and everything like that, when people kind of like were getting very much into nostalgia.
Yeah.
And even then, she was like, "No, thank you. I do not want that."
It's a bit kitschy, isn't it? I think is maybe
Yeah.
the politest way of calling it. It's grown on me a bit, I will say. I don't hate it as much as I did.
The shape of the new Mini in general, I think it's okay when you've got the 3-door hatch. You get to the 5-door hatch, it's a little bit questionable then. But as soon as you get to like the Countryman and those other ones, what were the other ones they got? They just
There was the Countryman, there was the Clubman,
That was it.
They're huge.
the Paceman.
Yeah.
The Pac-Man, you know. Actually, I seem to recall driving a Paceman and really liking it. Or was it a Countryman? I drove one of them and I was like, I really don't want to like this, but actually it works quite well.
The R56 Mini, that was good. My Tamani, my son, he had one of those. It was the Cooper S, and it was loads of fun.
The supercharged one, wasn't it?
No, turbocharged.
Oh, was that turbo? Oh,
second
sorry,
gen.
R53. That was the supercharged.
And you know what? Actually, again, if I could buy a car to just tuck away for a while, a first generation R53 John Cooper Works, which I believe you never got from the factory. It was an option kit for your Cooper S. Those are cool, but they've all disintegrated. Like there's something about them. Like for a while, they felt like they were actually quite well built. And then they hit about 10, 15 years old. And all of a sudden you get in them and things are just hanging off them. Like they fell apart. I mean, the spirit of Leyland and Rover is strong in those. It just took a little while to kind of come through.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that because back in the day, as I mentioned before, I used to work at Halfords and I installed a lot of radios in the first generation new Mini. And it was interesting. I did notice that it was starting to get weird and quirky and bits were just falling off them and doing strange things that they shouldn't. In fact, I once nearly killed a BMW 1 Series because of its poor wiring loom. So this was like a 2007, 2008 BMW 1 Series, and I was putting a hands-free kit in there, and I happened to just ever so slightly nudge the wiring loom that went to one of the main body control modules. The car wouldn't start. It would not do anything. And I called up a mechanic friend, and I was saying, oh my goodness, I think I've killed this car. I think I've broken it. And they said, what's it doing? I told him what was going on, what it was and wasn't doing. He said, just go back into the glove box area, pull the glove box down and just push on this one connector and I bet you it'll fix it. And lo and behold, it did fix it. So yeah, similar things with that was kind of happening with that whole era of like BMW. I don't know if this is something I'll get shot in the comments for, but I think the kind of the late 2000s BMWs, when they went to about the E60 onwards, had a lot more reliability issues. Probably like your 7 Series was included in that as well, with just electrical gremlins.
Well, the 7 Series, particularly from that generation onwards, a 7 Series, like all luxury cars, is just a complicated beast. In fact, gentlemen, pop quiz. The Lexus LS, the Japanese Titan that redefined a segment, okay? How many do you think they sold in Great Britain last year? I'll give you a moment. Share your workings. I'll have some schlur.
Is it going to be something really low? I feel like
250.
I'm going lower. I'm going 80.
3.
What? Wow.
They have only sold, I believe, something like 40 of them or so, I think, since the current model came out. Could be wrong on that one. But last year, 3. It was in this week's Autocar. The LS is discontinued in Great Britain.
Wow.
That's such a shame because, I mean, I've always loved a big boaty saloon, but it's just not what people want anymore.
I mean, also on the list of things that I would absolutely love, and a car laden with cool features, the Toyota Century.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, first off,
With a $12,000 exhaust.
yeah, the second generation is the one and only Japanese V12, which is already pretty amazing. And they built it just for refinement. That's it.
They had it so you could put part, and this is another quirk as well, part of the passenger seat, I believe, would fold down so the people in the back could put their feet through and use it to like rest their legs, did they not?
That is correct. And I believe it might be on the Century. I think it could perhaps be instead of maybe the Nissan President. A few of them do blend in. I think actually it's the President. It has soft close on one door.
Really?
Which is the near side, so basically passenger side, rear door. That's
where
it.
the important people are getting in and out.
That's where the important person will be sat. And you're correct. The seat in front of them, the center section of it, will fold down so you can just put your legs straight through and onto it. The Century also has a lamb's wool interior by default because it is warm in the winter, cool in the summer, and it's quiet. In fact, many of the high-end Japanese domestic market cars that I've reviewed recently, chiefly actually thanks to a lovely chap called Brad, who I think must have got his driveway done now because I haven't heard from him in a while. He kept buying cars in batches, and every time he brought me a new car, he said, at some point I'm going to have to stop importing these because I keep promising my partner that I am going to redo the driveway, and I haven't heard from him for a few months, so I'm assuming that he's actually had to do the driveway now. But because of him, I got to drive another car that I thought was an absolute hero that I never thought I'd get to try, which is the Toyota Auris Blade Master. Which, are you familiar with the Toyota Blade?
No.
So the Blade was their name for the Toyota Auris. Okay, so viewers from abroad might not even know what an Auris is, but for some reason that I honestly cannot fathom, for one generation, I think it's just one generation, maybe even two, Toyota decided to basically ditch the Corolla name here and rebranded it as the Auris, which nobody was impressed by because the people that didn't want to buy a Corolla didn't want to buy an Auris, and the people that did buy the Corolla were confused why they couldn't buy a Corolla anymore. But in Japan, you could have your Toyota Corolla hatchback with a 3.5 litre V6.
Wow. That's cool.
Yep. The same one as you would basically find in the back of a Lotus Evora. So the classic 2GR FE, I think it is. I know that's one in the Evora, but I'm pretty sure it's the same one they had because of the pre-direct fuel injection.
And how was that to drive?
Very boring.
Oh.
Because you know what? I rarely, you know me, Ant, very well. We have quite different tastes in cars. It's rare I drive a car and I think this thing is screaming out to be modded. You know, because you drove it and it did just feel like they only came with a 6-speed auto gearbox. And you drive it and you think, this car just feels like a Toyota Auris with a bit more go in it. Like that's it. It wasn't hard. It wasn't, stiff or uncompromising. It wasn't loud. And I drove it and I thought, this car is desperate for a body kit, some nice alloys, a bit of an exhaust, sportier suspension. So you know that you've bought something, you've gone and stuffed this whole great big engine in the front, which is quite an achievement in that car, and then gone, that's all right, we'll go home, shall we, lads?
That'll do.
Yeah, that'll do. But again, I think it's the Japanese thing of like, they did the hard work and then left the rest of it to the customer.
Speaking of modifications, something I should mention just in case somebody was thinking, what on earth is he talking about? $12,000 exhaust on a Century. There's a YouTuber called SPORTZ, and he bought a Century, and I've forgotten the name of the exhaust company in Japan, something Bright. Can't remember what they're called now.
Pass.
Anyway, he had them build a, equal length header, straight through exhaust on this V12, and it sounds like a Pagani Zonda.
Is this the same guy that in Japan as well had it happen to an S600 as well? Did he have that? Because I swear there's maybe...
because he had the Merc. The F-Sport had the Merc, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Was it him also had the Century?
Yeah.
I think it was, I remember seeing videos on that.
With a $12,000 exhaust. That was his thing for quite a while. He's got a few cars.
Just get everything and put a $12,000 exhaust on it. Yeah. To be fair, I've known a few guys that have had work done on their cars in Japan, and $12,000 does not go as far as you would like to think.
No.
Like, the labour rates over there are expensive. We're actually very, very lucky in Britain with what it costs to get stuff done to cars. Like, the labour rate in Japan, I think, is like 3 or 4 times what it is here. It's nuts.
Speaking of getting stuff done to cars, I said this in our little group chat. I want to get you at some point this year on the tools on video.
Oh, God.
I think it would be great fun to see just maybe doing an oil change or something. Because I remember when I was asking you about it when we were over at yours, I said, do you ever work on your cars? And you said, well, no, why would I do that when I get a man to do it?
Yeah, just get a man in. It's fine.
Exactly. I feel like for at least one episode or something, I should get you on the tools. Have you ever serviced a car? What work have you done on your own cars before?
So the sort of stuff that I've done is I've done like those fiddly little tasks, typically on the interior, that require a bit of time but not a lot of skill. So I'll give you one example. On my mentioned in the previous podcast 7 Series, one of the things that didn't work, which bugged the hell out of me, was the thigh bolster for the thigh support for the seat, because it being a 7 Series, it's got like, you know, zillion way adjustment electric seats, but there's the thigh bolster that should come out didn't work. You press the button and you could hear it working, but it didn't do anything. So I figured, right, something's obviously gone wrong there, and the seat is probably shared with a 5 Series. Let's do a quick bit of Googling. And it turns out, yeah, what happens, very common fault, there's a little like worm, what do you call it, worm drive, worm gear in there, which is what, you know, moves it forward and backwards. That's it. And that's made of plastic when it breaks. So there's a Chinese company manufactures the same thing, but in brass, and it won't break. Cool. And to do it, you have to disassemble the part of the seat, which is not particularly difficult. It's just fiddly. And you put this thing in, and then it works. So I did that, and I even made a video on it. And there was a lot of swearing involved.
Yeah, I remember that.
I think I made it sort of again, perhaps might have been during COVID times when there wasn't much else to do. So I've done little stuff like that. I've tarted around with like some basic stereo bits and things like that.
But have you done an oil change before?
No.
So I think it's time we get you on the tools. We're going to do it. People in the audience, do comment. Let us know via the email address or comments. Do you want to see James working on a car?
Can I say, in my defence,
Yes,
that I'm useless?
that's fine. That's absolutely fine.
I'll do it on the Maestro.
Do you know what? That's due an oil change soon. Absolutely, because I was thinking that there's loads of room. You can get it in there. You can do that.
That would be a good JayEmm and Friends video.
I think
I'll hold the camera.
All right.
Absolutely.
You hold the camera,
You
I'll
hold the spanners.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. So Anne, how much work have you done on cars before?
I've actually done quite a lot. When I was very young, my dad had an old Wolseley. I don't remember which model it was, but I remember it was British Racing Green. I was about 13 years old. And yeah, we spent quite a lot of time getting that working, which was a bit of a pain. It had this really old, like 3-speed automatic gearbox that was pretty broken. And yeah, we worked on that. And then when I was a student, I couldn't afford stuff. So when I had to change the brake pads, I changed the brake pads myself. And actually, last year, on my son's car, which we haven't said what it is yet on the channel, mainly because of weather issues, but we'll come to that. We did a big brake kit upgrade on that. And he did most of the work because he knows that I don't really enjoy working on cars. I quite like the satisfaction you get at the end when it's done, but I don't like the actual process, whereas he loves the process. He loves working
Although
on
I do
cars.
seem to recall, without spoiling what happened, that there were a few things he had to do that I think both you and I said, why don't you just get a man in to
Oh, no,
do
that's a different car.
Oh, it's a different car, is it?
That's a different car. And we are actually getting someone to do that. But
Yeah.
no, on this particular car, one of the issues was with this particular brake upgrade, the caliper carriers needed to be modified in order to make space for this larger caliper. And my son had never done any work with a grinder before. So, whereas I have, because when I was growing up, I worked in my dad's metal fabrication shop. So I used to do welding and profile cutting and even spray painting and all sorts of stuff.
So you can do the sill on my Golf then?
Hell no. Listen, I traded spanners for a keyboard a long time ago, keyboard and mouse. But yeah, so I ended up helping him modify the caliper carriers because he didn't trust himself with the grinder. And yeah, but I'm not particularly into it, if that makes sense. It's just not my thing.
I think when you do, now I'm going to put something out there. You don't have to know how to work on cars. You don't even have to own a car or have a driving license to be somebody that enjoys cars. You can get enjoyment from cars from many different ways and different avenues. And I think if you're a car person and you like them, you will find a way to enjoy them, even if it doesn't involve driving or working on them. But I definitely think there is an enjoyment and a good satisfaction from having done a job on a car yourself and learning about things on the car that gives you a greater kind of appreciation and ability to diagnose stuff when it goes wrong as well. When you can do a little bit of work on your own car, even if it's basic stuff, just like changing an air filter, doing an oil change, something like that. And it does bring you closer to your
I could
machine.
do air filters, and I've done cabin filters. I had one particularly entertaining scenario with the MG ZS that Laurie and myself had. It had a few problems, very common ones with that car. I mean, who would have thought MG Rover? Lots of common problems. One of them was the fact that you've got like 4 settings on the fan blower, and basically what happens is the resistors die, and then what happens is it'll only either do nothing or everything. You know, stage 1 and 2 will just not do anything. So you go, okay, so you need to change some resistors, and fine, done. That's reasonably easy to do. But the fan itself was also very, very noisy. So I thought, okay, all right, going to get a new fan. I made 2 mistakes. First off was that I also wanted to clear out the cabin filter. So I took the cabin filter out, which in those is housed basically behind the glove box. I took that out, and it was clearly like rancid, basically. And I then turned on the fan. And what followed next was like a version of, you know, the end of the Crystal Maze where they're stuck in that phone booth trying to grab money. Imagine that, but instead of money, it was like 10 years worth of dried leaves.
Wow.
My Elise used to like doing that to me. Elises have no cabin filter. So every now and again, if you haven't used it for a while, it will just fire a load of dried leaves at you for fun.
Oh, the Maestro does that too. And it's even better than that is because it's old and the foam is deteriorating inside all the air ducts. So occasionally you'll turn it on and you'll get leaves and foam just fired in your face. Like I did it once, and I actually had to hoover the car out because it was everywhere.
Yeah. So I bought off eBay a new fan for the interior. Took the old one out, and it appeared to be very simple. You take like a piece of trim off, it's 3 bolts, put the new one back on. And I looked at it, and it looks like it wants to fit, but it didn't want to fit. So I looked at it, and I looked at it, and I looked at it. I was like, I don't, this is so simple. So I was like, I put the old one back on, that fit fine. Okay, well, the new one looks the same, I don't get it. So I think I managed to get like 1 bolt to do up, and it sort of sat kind of right in the thing. Turned it on, and it wasn't happy. And then after a little while, I spent some time looking at it, and I realised they'd sent me the fan from a left-hand drive car, and it sided. So what was happening is when I had it running, it was pulling all the air out of the cabin and taking it outside.
Brilliant.
So yeah, that was unfortunate. They're full of lots of little quirks and oddities, those cars. I mean, in the Rover 75 and the MG ZT, I could never quite understand what their obsession was with making all of the dials oval. They had this thing with ovals in that car. The window switches are basically an oval. The dials are an oval. They just went oval crazy. And it's really frustrating because as your speed increases, it becomes slightly harder to tell exactly what speed you're doing because the needle gets further away from the numbers.
Bizarre.
It's really bizarre. Oh, tell you something though. We will never, ever be forgiven for doing an episode talking about quirks and features if we don't talk just a little bit about Saab.
I don't know much about Saabs.
Okay. I'll give you a couple of ideas, a couple of suggestions. The cup holder in a Saab is a work of art. It's just you see the cup holder there, it's sat vertically, it's tucked away in the dash, and you press a button and it comes out and rotates through, I think, about 270 degrees before coming to a rest. But the best bit with a Saab You've also got, of course, the key that goes on the center console, not the dash, because a long time ago, some bright spark realized that in an accident, the key is likely to dig into your thigh, where it could do quite a bit of damage. So you had to have it in the center console. And to get it out of the center console, the car has to be in park. It's clever stuff, right? But you've also got night mode. And night mode, when engaged, turns off every single light on the dash except your speed. And you can set it so that it will illuminate only up to a certain portion. I think basically from 0 to 70 or give or take. And if you go beyond that, it will then illuminate the rest of the dash. But it's a great mode because one of my bugbears with modern cars, one thing I always test if I have a car on loan for a week is, can I turn off the center display? Because if I'm driving at night, particularly if I've got a long way to go, I want no extraneous light sources. The worst, actually, my 7 Series did this, is when the display turns off, but the backlight is still on. Oh. Which means it's not really off. It's just bright grey then at that point. I hate that sort of stuff. And some modern cars, like the Cupra, you couldn't turn the centre display off. And to me, it's so distracting. And it's just full of unnecessary information. It's another reason I dislike the Teslas, because it's this vast ocean of information. And at night, all I want to know is, how fast am I going?
Yeah.
Just tell me, in an electric car in particular, how fast am I going?
I find that kind of thing very distracting. Very distracting. So that's why what's quite good. Some cars are better at it than others. For instance, my wife's Clio, brand new, 2024 plate Clio, that actually dims up really quite nicely at night. I don't have to worry about adjusting the display on that, and I don't find that it sits and you see it in the corner of your eye. Yeah. My mother's Sandero, however, have to turn the display off at night. Because that one, just the light sensing isn't as good. It just is too bright still. Yeah. But talking about Saab again, do you remember they're the ones that had the infinity style vents, didn't they? Remember you'd put them up and you'd move it about, and they looked so cool. Yep. They're really cool until you break them.
Yes.
No, and I have a story about this. I was doing a radio on a Saab of some sort, 9395, something like that. And the thing is, when cars get older and when you're taking stuff apart, sometimes it just breaks. It's inevitable. No matter how careful you are, occasionally things break. And I remember I was pulling these vents out the dashboard. What happened was the front and the rear of it just came apart. And it shouldn't normally do that when you pull it out. And I couldn't get that back together for love nor money. So we ended up having to, telling my boss sheepishly at Halfords, I'm sorry, I broke these 9.5 vents, whatever it was. And I had to end up ordering a replacement set on eBay and getting reimbursed them. But they were still cool though. But that's how I remember so much about those. Those are great.
Have you ever seen the gear lever on a Genesis GV60?
No, I haven't.
So it's an EV. Genesis, for those who don't know, it's basically it's Kia and Hyundai's kind of equivalent to Lexus or Infiniti. So it's the more upmarket brand. So the cars are sort of familiar if you know your Kia and Hyundai's, but they are very nice. And actually, I think a bargain, because people here don't really know what they are, so they depreciate really fast. And that means as a second-hand buy, they're brilliant and they're lovely to drive. The GV60 was, I think, their first ground-up EV, built on the same platform as the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and the Kia EV6. And inside, though, it's so much nicer than either of those. And the gear lever is like a crystal ball in the sort of center console that when you get in the car, it doesn't really say or do much at all. But when you turn the car on, it rotates completely around, leaving you the gear controls, which you can then rotate it, sort of like like an audio shuttle. Forward, backwards, for a bit like the Jaguar Land Rover rotary selector. But yeah, then when you turn the car off, it just completely disappears again. It's a nice little touch. Yeah, but I like stuff like that in cars. And I think this is why I wanted us to do like a whole episode just talking about the nice little touches, because you know what? Like, it's really easy to get wrapped up in horsepower figures, 0 to 60 times, top speed, lap times, that sort of stuff. But how many times have you ever done sub 7 minutes at the ring, right? Never, okay?
Not in real life.
No. I haven't done it in a video game. But if you get in a car And every time you turn it on, it makes you smile, or you're delighted at the fact your friend has bought a coffee because you can show off your fancy cup holder. Like, if in some small way the car makes you happy by doing something, like, I just think that's a nice thing. And with cars, in some cases, becoming a little bit more bland and, dull today, I think it's increasingly important that we have these opportunities for little design flares. And I've said for a long, long time, I think that as now we're moving towards a larger percentage of EVs on the road, I think manufacturers are going to have, again, to look at ways of thinking, well, how do we differentiate what we do? BMW can now no longer say, will you buy a BMW because we give you a straight six and rear wheel drive? Because they're going to give you an EV motor and either rear or all-wheel drive, just like everybody else.
Well, just look at what the French are doing with Renault and their upcoming they got the Renault 5 now, they've got the Renault 4 coming, and they've got the Twingo as well that's potentially coming, and they're bringing all these quirky cars back and adding some fun into the EV space, which actually makes me kind of excited about electric cars as somebody who's just
awesome.
Found them a little bit boring. It's the kind of thing I look at and I'd like to own. I want a Twingo so bad.
Well, you've got to think for the A290, haven't you?
I do. It just looks very cool, but I couldn't possibly buy one without actually just going for a test drive.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't really have a need for an EV.
No.
Well, well, maybe a bit more at the minute, more than normal, but normally I don't.
There isn't really a practical need for me to have an EV anymore. It wouldn't make much sense. But what I think kills it for me, there are cars out there that I would actually just quite like to own that happen to be EVs.
Honda E.
No. It's very quirky, it's very cool, but I've been driving around the last couple of days in a BMW i3S, which is an extraordinarily cool piece of engineering. There's so much about it. I mean, it's a city car with a carbon fiber monocoque. It's ludicrously over-engineered. It's a fantastic thing, although it rides really, really badly.
Well, those 20-inch rims probably aren't helping with that.
They do not help at all, and the suspension settings are just moronic. But because I did about 230 miles in it the other day, I had to stop and charge about 3 times because it massively overestimates its range every time. It's the largest battery version they did, and it still only struggles to do 100 miles between charges. And the fact is that I would have taken the 550 if it weren't for the fact that they salted the roads the night before. And when I stopped and did my maths, because I was stopping at public charging points and paying like 80 pence a kilowatt, I worked out that actually I wouldn't really have saved any money by taking the i3 over the Ferrari. And that's insane.
This is why, for me, EVs personally make sense if you can charge them yourself at your own home address, and you pretty much only ever need to charge it there unless it's a rarer occasion. Someone like me, my commute is easily within the battery pack of most normal EVs, and I could do that commute a fair few times, and I don't have to worry. So for something like, for instance, driving here to my house, my diesel doesn't always warm up, especially in the winter.
Yeah.
So I do sometimes think, this is where a car that's a bit more like...
Also, because if you had an EV, you could tell it what time you're leaving the house in the morning. It'll be nice and warm when you get to it. There's so many things I love about them. And one of the things that I really like about EVs are all of these little features and quirks and things that are now possible because of the technology. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what manufacturers are going to be doing over the coming years, because cars in general have struggled in the last sort of decade because regulations have gotten so stringent, from emissions to crash legislation and everything else. But just because of the way that EVs are built, there are now, like for France, they've struggled making interesting, spicy cars because the horsepower tax and things over there are punitive. But because EVs have no local emissions, well, Kia would never have built a 600 horsepower car unless it was an EV.
Yeah.
You know, so there are lots of manufacturers out there that historically, or maybe, maybe historically they did build cool stuff like the French, but now they don't. But because EVs are a thing, well, hang on a minute. There's no CO2 out the back of the thing, so they can start doing sexy stuff. You can also do sexy styling stuff. I mean, look at this, the Renault 5, like that would never have happened if they were still having to put an engine in it.
Yeah.
Like it couldn't have happened.
No.
What do you think of, is it that Hyundai EV which has the gear, the video game style gear changes?
That's the 5N. I haven't driven one yet, but I want to because people
sounds
say
funny.
Apparently, it's a riot.
Yeah, I've heard that I'd be quite interested to see, because I know it's very much fake, but at the same time, this is the way that the world is going, is to something which is probably not combustion related. So if you can get a little bit of enjoyment out of it, then maybe that's okay.
There's actually a lot to be said for synthesizing gears, because what you're also doing is synthesizing the power delivery, because EVs do have a problem with giving you all of the torque straight away. It does create traction issues and various things. And I've nearly got stuck in a couple of fields because I've been in an EV that's been all-wheel drive, but it's just got so much power, you can't meter it out easily. And when the wheels start spinning, they start spinning so fast. But the other thing for me as well is, I know it's really easy for people to be sort of, oh, this is rubbish, it's horrible, it's all fake. Look, if you're having fun and you're having real fun,
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Exactly.
It just doesn't.
And, I mean, that counts, as far as I'm concerned, as a weird quirk in a car where you've got gear changes in an EV, which makes no sense. But some of them have different sounds as well that you can choose. In fact, that same car, you've got different propulsion sounds that you can choose from. And what's even funnier is some of the modifications for some of these EVs now include external speakers that you can get aftermarket that create an external sound that's programmable. But there was a couple of features I wanted to mention before we very quickly wrap up. One of them was on my 350Z, I thought this was the coolest thing in the world, is it didn't have reach adjustment, but it did have rake adjustment on the steering wheel. And the dashboard, the binnacle, moved with it. So, it angled itself
Does it on
in your
GTR
direction.
as well?
I don't know. I don't think it was on the GTR. It was definitely on the 350Z and the 370Z.
And the McLaren 750.
And the McLaren
which
750.
also has the folding dash, which is really cool.
I think they got rid of that, didn't they?
No,
The 720.
The 720 had the folding dash. Yeah, 750 has the Nissan style whole binnacle moves, as I think does Artura, because it's basically the same thing. Yeah, 720 had the folding driver's dash, which is obscenely cool. And I got to say, you know what? I got to live with a friend's McLaren 720S for a while, and after it tried to kill me, I got on with it a lot better. And the whole time I had it, I never, ever got tired of the doors.
Oh, the doors are great.
There is something about, particularly with the 720, more so than the 650, because it's cut into the roof as well. The whole thing goes up, sort of like almost not quite gullwing style because it's different, but when you get that huge section of roof come out, it's just impossibly cool. And seeing the car sat there with the door open at an angle, it's just mega. Like the joy it brought to everybody who saw it. Like I went to go and pick up a friend and I was waiting for him, and then some local kids looked at it and they went nuts, and it's like, do you want to sit in the car? And they were so happy. And you're like, because they're like, oh my god, it's a McLaren, like what the heck? Like they basically look like they just won the lottery. Like
so were you going to say something?
Well, yeah, I was going to say there's a couple of quirks and features that I wanted to mention, and the one that annoys me on one of my cars is on the Lamborghini, on the Gallardo, in order to put the windows up, you pull down on the switch. And in order to put the windows down, you push up on the switch. So I have to remember, when I get into that car and I want to use the window switch, I always have to think like a fighter pilot. So you pull back to go up, push forward to go down. Right, just remember that. It still catches me out.
Why don't you just get someone to pull it apart and just reverse the
switch?
That's
well,
what
I actually
I
have
do.
to replace one of them, so that I might actually do that. And the other quirk that I wanted to mention, actually, which is one that we haven't talked about, and you mentioned a gear selector, but then started talking about EVs, is dogleg gearboxes. And what was the Aston Martin 7-speed dogleg manual?
Oh, yeah, the V12 Vantage S has that.
I've never seen a 7-speed manual, like,
Yeah.
apart from like in like trucks and things and stuff like that.
Yeah. I never actually got to drive one of those with the dogleg. I've been offered a few of them. It's just, for whatever reason, never happened.
We should probably tell people what dogleg means, because not everyone will know. Most people will.
No. Well, you know, the funny thing, though, is I suppose it is technically a dogleg, isn't it? Okay, so dogleg in this scenario, imagine your traditional H-pattern gear lever. So you're in neutral. To go into first, you go left and up. Then to second is below that. Then, back to the center, up for third, so on and so forth. Well, imagine that to get into first, you have to pull left and then down. And where you expect first to be is typically reverse.
And then second is up, across, and up.
And
third is where you would... at the bottom of that.
And it's quite common. And actually, it makes a lot of sense, particularly for a performance car, because you basically never have to go into first unless you're pulling away from a stop. But what you do all the time is go from second to third. And by having the dog leg, you go from second to third quite easily. And a vast number of Ferraris, until they moved to 6-speed, had a dog leg first.
Yep.
Porsche 928 had it, which is actually quite frustrating because no other Porsches, I think, did. BMW E30 M3 had it. There's a lot of cars had it.
M535.
Yeah. So a lot of cars had it for a lot of performance cars. But yeah, these ones, obviously, then it's a 7-speed manual, which is already a weird thing. And yeah, so you've got like an extra, row of gears, as it were.
But I don't think it was so much just for performance cars. I think it was derived from racing.
Correct.
And again, because you're only in first when you're pulling away at the start or in the pits, and that's it. The rest of the time, what you want to do is reduce the amount of times you have to go across when you're changing. So that way, if you're going from second to third, then fourth to fifth, you're reducing the number of times across you have to go. You're halving the number of times you have to go across, as opposed to having to go from the traditional second across and up to third, then down to fourth, and then to fifth, across and up again.
Yeah. Also makes it a lot less likely for you to money shift it by accidentally going from second back into first.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the reason for the doglegs. But I've never driven one, but I've always been curious about how long it would take to get used to it.
A little while.
Yeah.
I have a great supercar quirk for you before we look at wrapping up.
Oh, yeah.
So, you may already know this. What supercar shares the climate control system with a Rover 45?
I knew. The minute you said climate control, I knew it's a Zonda.
Yes.
Specifically, it's facelift Rover as well, an MG, this MG ZS, yeah.
I know it's probably quite a common one, but that still blows my mind. And it's mad. It's probably one of the only cheap bits on a Zonda to replace.
Well, I mean, there's so many examples of these independent manufacturers or supercar and hypercar manufacturers having to borrow parts, because developing silly little things like switches and lights and things like that are ridiculously expensive. Like famously, the McLaren F1, the tail lights were from a coach, if I remember correctly. And when the Lamborghini Diablo went from pop-ups to non-pop-ups, because they brought out the next generation of Diablo and all the regs had changed where you weren't allowed to have pop-ups anymore, rather than developing their own lights, they bought them off of Nissan, and it's from the 300ZX.
Yes.
And the 300ZX was the first car in the world to have such a shallow rake on their headlights. In fact, when they were first told, right, it's got to be a 60-degree rake on the headlights, the engineers said, no, not possible. And eventually they were just told, you'll find a way. And they did. So for Lamborghini to then have to develop similar headlights, they were like, makes no sense. So they just bought them from Nissan. And at the top of the light, there's a little piece of carbon fiber trim, which they put there to hide the embossed Nissan logo.
Yep.
That's great. Didn't the DB7 have some other random Ford or MX-5 bits?
Mazda 323 door handles, I think.
That was it. It was something like that.
The Diablo, by the way, has the key, and therefore presumably key barrel, and I think possibly even indicator stalks from a Morris Ital. Yep.
Brilliant.
Oh, and another one is the Murcielago's indicators on the side are from a Ford Focus.
Yes. Wasn't that a big thing which went viral because Matt Armstrong was talking about that? Wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And you also, I think Citroen CX wing mirrors appeared on countless cars. I think the McLaren F1 used it. I think the Lotus Esprit used it. Like they were, I think that maybe the XJ220 might have used it as well. Like because they're a good design. Like, and again, like Ant says, like to prototype and build these things is
And homologate them as well.
Yeah, that's the big thing.
Do you guys remember when people were modifying their cars and putting, was it M3 style mirrors on everything?
Yeah,
back in the 2000s?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was quite common. I had a set of those on one of my Peugeot 106s and they were horrendous. They just couldn't see anything out of them.
I just remembered one last thing on tail lights, because I always used to make a joke about saying I used to own a part of a Noble, and that's because the Mark 1 tail lights from the Mark 1 Mondeo are the same taillights that they ended up using on the Noble, the first one,
the
M12. That was it.
So, as car guys, we're a bit weird about certain things, right? Okay, so my dad had, I think still has, a 355, right? And like most Ferraris, it didn't really go very far or go out very often or anything like that. And it just sat in the garage or in storage under a car cover. And one day I noticed that because I didn't even, I went years without seeing the car, right? I hardly ever went out in it as a kid. And it's one of the reasons why today I'm so keen to use my Ferrari and share it as often, because I lived in a house with one and I can count on, two hands probably the number of times I went out in the thing over years and years and years. And it always frustrated me. Anyway, one day I noticed that the car cover changed. And I said, "Oh, you got a new cover for the Ferrari?" He goes, "Yeah." He said, "Well, the old one was getting a little bit, moth-eaten and looking a bit secondhand. And anyway, it never fit properly anyway." I was like, "Oh, did it? I didn't think it is." He said, "Yeah, no, it never fit properly because it was off an F50." I was like, "Hang on a minute, you could have told me this. Like, that's probably worth a fortune on eBay, and it just got chucked in the bin."
Oh, God.
I was like, because I think, again, at the time, the dealer just had this cover lying around that was supposed to be for an F50. He'd got the car, and they were like, "Yeah, here you go, have this cover. It's not for the right one, but the F50's bigger than the 355, so it'll easily fit." It's like, oh, come on.
Well, there you go. So if you happen to notice that your parents or relative have a car cover that doesn't quite fit, just make sure you double check exactly what car it came from, because it might be worth more than your daily.
Yeah.
I think that's it. I think we are probably going to wrap it up here. So
I think we've had a good ramble fest today.
I think we have. So, as ever, please keep those comments coming. Give us suggestions and ideas for things we can improve. Tell us what you like, what you don't like, and more than anything else, make sure, if you haven't already, to subscribe to the Radiator Arms, either on YouTube as part of the JayEmm and Friends channel or on your chosen podcast provider, be it Spotify, Amazon, or, if you must, Apple Music. But regardless of how you've listened or watched us, we really, really appreciate it, and we shall see you for the next installment of the Radiator Arms.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.